tonight. A number of monster matchups, and Timmy Legler is here to knock down a couple of threes. Tim, let's start with a game of contender or pretender. The Lakers are currently 9th in the West. Are they a contender or a pretender?
I'm going to say pretender, and here's why. I think their ceiling is similar to what their team was a year ago. But the problem is the ceiling overall in the Western Conference is higher. They're not going to run into a situation in the second round where you get a team like Golden State that just physically could not match up with them. That won't be the case in the West. So, look, they're always going to be dangerous because of their top two stars, but those minefields in the Western Conference look a lot different than they did a year ago.
Well, you just mentioned the Warriors. They're 10th in the West. Are they a contender or a pretender?
Again, I'd list them as dangerous, but a pretender. They're not making a run all the way through the Western Conference. I do think that they're going to get more interesting here down the stretch because I did see some things I liked going into the break. They just look better. They look sharper. They look like some guys are starting to find their rhythm. They got to get Chris Paul back at some point. That's gonna make a big difference. We'll see what happens with Klay Thompson coming off the bench. Ultimately, they're not big enough, and I don't think they're good enough defensively.
And let's talk about Phoenix. Suns are 5th in the West. Are they a contender or a pretender?
They're definitely a contender because of how good offensively they are when these three guys play together. I think their effective field goal percentage is 55% as a team when they play, 44% from the three. I mean, those are just bonkers numbers. Like, that's a team that may be so good offensively, we don't care as much about depth or defensive end of the floor because they're unstoppable. And at times, they look that way offensively. So a team with that kind of talent at the top, I think you have to list as a contender.
Absolutely. And, of course, it's led by Kevin Durant, one of the all-time greats. And every now and again, Durant says very interesting things, and the entire world needs to react. And that has happened here. Kevin Durant, first you're going to hear what he had to say about the perceptions he feels exist about him and his leadership style, and then you will hear some of the reaction from First Take.
I'm not as charismatic as my peers. I don't have a personality that's like fit for TV like my peers, and a lot of those stories of what we talk about don't get spoken about in the media, and that's just really what it is. It's like you got to sell what you're doing as well, and I haven't sold it enough, you know. And I feel like I don't feel like I need to. I don't feel like I want people to call me a leader, but I also don't want people to say I'm not one either.
Here's what I know about Kevin Durant. I know that Kevin Durant leads by example. I know the way he approaches his craft. This is a guy that lives, breathes, eats, sleeps basketball. That's a form of leadership.
In the end, it is perfectly within bounds to sit up there and look at Kevin Durant, recognize him as being an absolutely phenomenal future Hall of Famer, but we would argue that his type of leadership didn't necessarily lead to more success that he could have had.
It's an interesting discussion, and KD's such an interesting person. He's one of the 3 players who defined this era of basketball, and I think that's what he's talking about. LeBron James, made for television, more charisma than you could possibly imagine. Steph Curry, maybe the most beloved player ever. And then there's KD, whose game certainly puts him directly with those guys. Is he, in your view, mischaracterized or misunderstood by the basketball public?
I think so. And I'm going to stick with KD a little bit on this one because I think when you look at his leadership style, is it all that different from Steph Curry? Is it all that different from a Kawhi Leonard? Right? But what did those guys do? They were able to take a group of guys and lead them to a championship, a place they hadn't been before. That's the one thing he's lacking. If he had won a championship at Oklahoma City, nobody would question his leadership. Now, if you want to say he needed to be a better leader alongside Russell Westbrook to rein him in certain ways, particularly like late game, good luck with that. Have you ever met Russell Westbrook or watched him play? That can't be an easy thing to do, to rein in a guy that is that much alpha. So I'm not going to lay that at his feet. I think nobody would be saying squat about Kevin Durant's leadership if he had the one thing on his resume that he's lacking, and that he has an opportunity to do it in Phoenix. Not only take a group of guys a place they haven't been, a franchise to a place that they have never been collectively. That's the one thing lacking, and if he gets that done, this leadership question goes away. So I just think he shows up every day, his approach is his leadership. Just like Steph, just like Kawhi. That's how they do it, that's how he does it. I think it's an overstatement to say his leadership lacks.
That's fair. I am a Durant fan and supporter. However, I do think that the Brooklyn experience does go on his resume, and not in a positive way. It's not enough in Brooklyn to say he showed up and worked hard every day, because that was such a dysfunctional mess that someone had to step forward and be the leader and say, Kyrie, this is what, James, this is what, and that's not what happened, and it wound up being one of the great disasters that we've ever seen in sports.
It's probably the greatest underachievement in the history of the league.
And it has to go on his, his record.
But the only thing I will say is think of the names you're throwing out there. It's similar to what I said about Westbrook. Good luck.
But he chose those guys, though, Tim. The difference is he chose them. He didn't choose Westbrook.
But try corralling those type of personalities.
But my point is, he chose to leave Golden State and team up with Kyrie and let Kyrie be the alpha instead of himself. And then he was all in on bringing in Harden. There's no way they were doing that if he wasn't in on it. My point is, decision-making of that sort is a part of leadership.
That's fair. If you want to question his decision-making to make that move, that's fair. Why would you leave Steph Curry for that? We've talked about that ad nauseum. Clearly, what he experienced in Golden State was not fulfilling enough for him. Even at the end of the second championship he won in Golden State, like the look on his face when that was all over with, it didn't look that fulfilling because he knew he was never going to get enough credit because they were already great when he got there. So now he wanted another type of challenge. That's why he made that decision. And ultimately, he paired up with guys that were unreliable. And that thing blew up. So, yeah, that's fair. If you want to say what kind of decision is that, I don't know if that's as much leadership as it is he made a decision based on something he felt like he needed to fulfill.
Yeah, or maybe he thought he could handle those guys and maybe no one could. And now he's finally with the right guy. He's with Devin Booker. That's the right guy to be with. He doesn't need to be led. Devin Booker wants it as bad as anybody.